very welcome from Sligo down into your territory. My name is Emily Forbes and I'm the Community Development Work and Volunteer Coordinator at the Jackie Clarke Collection. And I'm here this evening with my two colleagues, our manager Edel Golden, who's at the back of the room. And if none of you have any objection, we've had a request from somebody from this area who is away, who's overseas, and is wondering if we could record some of it for him. So if nobody's any objections, the back of your heads might be on it. And Sinead Brennan, our Education Officer and teacher in the Jackie Clarke Collection. We're here this evening with Frank Bacon. Frank is one of my very valued volunteers here in the Jackie Clarke Collection. You can tell by his accent he's not local. And when he came through the door of the Jackie Clarke, not only did he sport a Dublin accent, he also sported a Dublin jersey. So that didn't go down too well with us. But we didn't throw him out because he's been so valuable to us. Frank has brought, and some of you here would have been at some of our lectures already, but Frank has brought some fabulous historians to the Jackie Clarke, and no more other than Michael Farry, who's here this evening. And between Frank and Michael, they are going to discuss, and we'll read it, 25 glorious years of searching the Irish Revolution in County Sligo. So we'll hand you over to Frank. Enjoy your evening, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Michael for accepting the invitation. I want to thank Mary Scott for hosting the event here this evening. And I also want to thank my wonderful comrades in the Jackie Clarke Collection in Ballina for making this happen. Okay, so Anne-Marie, Adele, and Ron. Okay, Sinead, sorry. Yeah, Mary Scott said to me that she would run me out of the place here if I didn't mention the Colleens ambush. Okay, so it's a work in progress. Okay, so I'm not finished, so you'll have to excuse me on that one, okay? But I think...
Will we have another night?
Well, yeah, we'll have more than one night, Martin, okay? So, I'm kind of interested in this because Martin, I had said to Martin, I'd heard about it, but I knew nothing about it. I didn't know any of the details at all about it. So, I know a little bit more now, and hopefully when I'm finished, you'll know a little bit more as well. But Martin, I had a most incredible day last May where Martin took me to meet a number of people, and we actually went up onto the bog, and it was just a powerful day, and the warmth and hospitality and the tea and biscuits and the chat. I just thought, I need to do something about this, all this information, okay? So, now, hopefully this is going to work for me, okay? So the most important thing is, I am here to learn and I am here to listen, okay? I moved over here 6 years ago from Dublin, and I love the place. I love West Sligo. I love the ruggedness of the landscape and the ruggedness of the people as well, okay? So I just feel very much at home here, alright? Now, in order to set the ambush in context, I just want to talk about a couple of things, okay? So the first one will be, almost 100 years ago, 1918, December, the British general election. So Sinn Féin wins 73 out of 105 of the Irish seats for the British Parliament, okay? And then the next month, in January, Sinn Féin convenes a Republican Parliament and sits in the Mansion House, Dublin. On the same day, the IRA in County Tipperary killed 2 policemen in order to capture explosives. So then we have the Irish War of Independence, so fought between British forces and the IRA. So Professor Ewan O'Halpin in Trinity College estimates that there was 2,141 people killed in the War of Independence. Okay, so the 11th of July is an important date when it comes to Colleens ambush, okay? Now, so in December of 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty is signed, which formally brings an end to the Irish War of Independence. So Republicans who oppose the treaty walk out. So we then have the Civil War, which is fought between pro-treaty Free State and anti-treaty Republican forces. So June 1922 to May 1923. Okay, sorry now, I'm not used to this laptop here. So you just have to bear with me. Okay, so why am I interested in this? So this photograph was taken in 1911. The man at the front there, second from the right, is my grandfather, Thomas Fagan. And he worked in Grangegorman. It was the largest psychiatric hospital in Ireland. It covered an area of about 30 acres, and it was self-sufficient. So they grew their own food. They had cattle. They made their own clothes for the inmates. And the staff lived within the hospital grounds. Okay. Now, my grandfather had a life outside of Grangegorman, and he was a member of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA, G Company, 1st Battalion, and he took part in a number of engagements, including the burning of the Custom House on the 25th of May 1921. The idea was, De Valera had the idea that he would carry out a spectacular and that it would make headlines around the world, which it did. But the idea was that the volunteers would go in, empty the building and burn the building, but it didn't work out like that. And what happened in the end was that 5 volunteers were killed, and it was a gun battle that ensued, and 3 civilians as well. Okay. So the building burned for 4 days, and it was visible from the Dublin Mountains. So I mean, you can just imagine, what it must have been like, for the people to see this. Okay, so these are my grandparents down in Carlow. These are my mother's parents. So I grew up in the north inner city, and I'd spend a lot of time in the summer down in my grandparents' farm, and it was another world. We had a great time down there. And I would have spent a lot of time with my grandfather. So that photograph was taken of him in the early 1970s. And this is him in the early 1920s. He's the first man on the left there. He was a member of the Carlow Brigade of the IRA, along with my grandmother's 2 brothers. And he fought in the Civil War. And he was captured by Free State Army. He spent time in Carlow Jail, Wicklow Jail, and Curragh. Okay, so one of the things that both my grandfathers had in common was that they had been involved in actions where people had been killed, but they never spoke about their experiences, ever. They never spoke about what they had seen, what they had done, or what other people had done either. So we are very lucky now because the pension applications that we can now view online tell us in great detail about what happened almost 100 years ago. Okay, so in June 1923, 2 months after the end of the Civil War, the Dáil agrees to recognise and compensate wounded members and the surviving dependents of deceased members of various groups that had participated in the events of 1916 to 1923. And the important bit was, and were deemed and proven to have had active service during this time. Okay? So they would write in and say, what they had taken part in, if they had been wounded and that as well. Okay? So those who had fought on the Republican side during the Civil War were excluded from this process. The Military Service Pension Act of 1934 amended and extended the Act of 1924 to include Republicans and members of Cumann na mBan. So that was when the Fianna Fáil government came in. They decided that they would extend the Act, and because maybe some of their own people might apply that. Okay. So a government memo in 1957 revealed that 82,000 people applied for pensions under the 1924 and 1934 Acts. Of these, only 15,700 were successful and 66,300 were rejected. I mean, that's an incredible figure. And Jim Farrager says that it's an archive of disappointment. But for us, the wonderful thing is that at some stage we will be able to view all 82,000. Okay? So only a portion of the pension applications have become available thus far to the public. So to date, there are 22 individuals who claim to have been connected with Colleens ambush. So if I go into the and search and I just put in Colleens, I get 22 applications, okay? And as I say, it's, for me, I like to take my time going through them all, okay? And okay, so the other source that I've used is an interview given by Matt Kilcawley for Enniscrone to Ernie O'Malley in 1951. So Matt Kilcawley participated in many of the activities of the local IRA flying column, and he also took part in the Colleens ambush. Okay. So the following is taken from an interview with Ernie O'Malley 30 years after the event. At the time of the ambush, Matt Kilcawley was the Vice OC. Now, so the original plan was to ambush the RIC in Temple Boy after holding up the post office there. Matt Kilcawley went against this plan and he decided that Tuffy in Colleens was a better target. He also felt that the men were more familiar with the Colleens area. Under cover of darkness, on the 1st of July 1921, 25 men moved into the area. At 8 AM, two of the volunteers, Jack Brennan and Tom Loftus, disguised themselves as tinkers and went in and they robbed the shop and took between 60 and 70 pounds with them. Mr. Tuffy was not there at the time, but his sister was. On his return at 8:45, on hearing of the robbery, he headed straight to Dromore West RIC barracks to report. At this point, the men selected their positions for the ambush, and they knew that they would have at least an hour to get ready. So I'm quoting directly now from his statement to Ernie O'Malley. "We did not cut wires or anything, either to excite or alert the RIC. Jack Brennan and Tom Loftus then went back into the shop to return the money, and the volunteers then occupied the shop, the house, the garden and the yard, so all around here. But the principal attack on them would have to be at the pub. We waited, we lay low, and they came in as the Angelus rung. The RIC had cycled from the barracks in extended formation. It's unclear the exact number in the patrol, 7 or 8. The first two were 200 yards ahead, and the next two with a similar gap between them all. And the first two of them reached Tuffy's, firing opened, but the last two only came under fire of a long range. Okay, so the first two RIC men dropped onto the road for cover and then returned fire before eventually being captured. Two of the other RIC men were badly wounded and the remainder escaped. One of them managing to jump onto a car that drove through the ambush, and he returned to Dromore West Barracks to raise the alarm. The volunteers now bandaged the two RIC and left them where they fell. They now had a further 6 rifles, 4 revolvers and 2 RIC pistols. After removing 3 bottles of brandy from the shop, the volunteers decided to head back to their base at Gowlon. Is it? When they were only about half a mile from the ambush scene, they came under fire from a long distance. The fire was coming from military who had travelled from Easky. It was at this point that the volunteers retreated as fast as they could across country. And when we came to a bog road, the bog was filled with people for the first 3 miles of it, and they were cutting turf. So it was a beautiful day. It was a lovely summer's day. 4 IRA lads who were cutting turf on the bog took up 4 shotguns. They opened fire on the military and the RIC. The first 4 lorries were tenders containing auxiliary and RIC. So given the level of fire that the volunteers were now under, and after a short council of war, a joint decision was made to shoot the 2 RIC men. This was then carried out. At this point, an additional 6 tenders with reinforcements arrived to assist the British military. The volunteers knew every inch of this area, and they had been camped out there for 5 weeks before that. Okay. The following details are taken from a sworn statement made before the advisory committee by Matt Kilcawley in support of his pension on 6th of January 1937. So question, the whole thing, ambush, lasted about half an hour. Answer, the first group about half an hour, not much longer, then half an hour, then a serious running fight took place. So reinforcements came on us. Later in the statement, Kilcoley estimates the total number of British military to be 600, and there was a running fight. That happened at 12 o'clock at Colleens, and there was a running fight from there until we landed away up at Callahar at dusk that evening. It lasted until dusk on the 1st of July. Now, I ran through this the other day with my wife to say, well, what do you think of it? She said, well, Jason, you stopped very quickly. And I said, well, so did the ambush. So, now, some interesting discoveries that I made along the way, okay? Because, like, we are so lucky, I was discussing this with Michael, you know, like the amount of material that's available online now is just incredible. You know, the links that you will find, okay? So, this one here now, I just thought this could only happen in Ireland. One of the men who carried out the initial robbery of Tuffy's at 8 a.m. that morning, Tom Loftus, had been elected in May 1920 to Ballina Rural District Council. I was thinking, well, some things don't change. He took the Republican side during the Civil War and was captured by Free State forces while sniping at SS Carter, carrying Free State soldiers from Killala to Enniscrone on the 6th of August 1922. While imprisoned in the Curragh, he spent 41 days on hunger strike. He was released in May 1924 and emigrated to America. So he returned to Ireland in 1932, the new government, okay, and joined the Guards. He was promoted to detective sergeant and then went to the special branch at Dublin Castle. Actually, he must have specialised in like robberies and whatever. In 1947, he was appointed captain of the guard in Leinster House, so he would have had a lot of influence there. By 1960, he was superintendent of the Oireachtas until he retired in 1963. So he's buried in Bunnycumben. And at one point, he was also De Valera's bodyguard. Now, and I got that information from Discover Mail, Thomas Loftus, the story of an Irish volunteer. Okay, now, my area of interest would be the pension applications, and I've put a selection of them up around the walls here. They are just incredible. The detail that's in the pension applications. You just go in, you type in a name, you type in a townland, and it will come up. Any mention of that particular townland will come up. But this is one now I had not seen the likes of before. Okay. So this is a man called Edward Gilday. Okay, now I've been told by Paddy Tuffy that he's not from Enniscrone, okay, but he's from County Mayo, but he's long dead at this point, okay. So I was looking through his pension application, and there's quite a number of pages in it, and I came across a sworn statement that he gave in the 1920s. Question, you were in the Culleens ambush. Answer, yes. Question, what part did you take in the ambush? Answer, I don't know whether I should say it or not, but I shot 2 policemen that were in it. You were armed, yes. What had you? A rifle. I think in all the pension applications I have seen, nobody has ever claimed anything like that. And he would have known then that other people would have seen this and verified. And then for me, this is where my journey started with Martin Wilson and Martin John Dalton that day. And I'm very grateful to Martin because, you know, I would have had this discussion with Michael earlier on, you know, given my own background, you know, my, you know, Republican sympathies and that. And it's been an education for me, you know, to discover that actually, you know what, there's another side to it as well. So, that's it now. That's me finished. So I don't know. I don't know if it made any sense or not because I feel that I've been camping with them for the last 5 weeks up in the Ox Mountains. So if there's any questions, I'm very happy to answer.
Where did the RIC cycle from to get here?
Jamore West.
From where?
Yeah, we were driving there today. We think, geez, they must have been fit. They cycled from the barracks in Jamore West all the way to here.
Where was that bar? Which bar?
The other, I think it's where the Undertaker says now, isn't it? Martin. Opposite the Undertaker's.
Undertakers.
Yeah.
Undertakers place now.
Yeah, so that's where they cycle from. But in extended formation, we were talking about this today, that's what saved them, otherwise they would have all been killed.
Right. Well, we only have to tell you the background to this little small monument.
I would love to hear that, Martin.
Just for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to come up here?
Well, can I do that just for a
Yeah,
minute?
of course you can. The other man, they got me interested in it. I got to pull the table out and then I love that bigger than me.
But could I just say, as the previous speaker had just said, Frank has done wonderful work for them, but I think he's done wonderful work for us all in researching all of this. And while I have an interest in local history too, I don't simply have the time to do what Frank has done. So, Frank, I think you're wonderful. But the and that was your presentation tonight was excellent. Now, a few years ago, some people arrived here in Colleens, and they were descendants of either the king. The two people who were killed, by the way, one was Higgins and the other was King. And some of their descendants arrived here in Colleens some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, trying to find out more about where the ambush took place. Mary Scott was here at the time, and she didn't know a lot about it. She sent them down to Paul Tuffy in the post office. And Paul said that they should go to Merton John Dolphin, because the two soldiers were shot on Dolphin's Bog, which is just about 2 miles away up the road here to the back. How many of you know it? Some of you know it. Yeah. But, so Merton Dolphin wasn't home that evening, and he brought them up to the bog, and he showed them the exact spot, because when he was a young man, when he went to the bog cutting turf first, he remembered seeing, and he was only 8 years at the time, he remembered seeing RIP cut into the bank. It had been cut in with the hay knife. So they cut the bog back to that section, and they kept away from that. But over the years, the cattle got up on top of this mound and the RIP part disappeared. But the mound is still there to this day. But the family were so delighted to have found this spot, so they knelt down and they prayed and they cried, and they went back to the States. So I think he was an elderly man, and he felt at the time that now he had found this spot, but he would like that he might die and nobody else might know about it. So he organised for more of the family to come home, and he brought home a busload of them a few months later, and he showed them the exact spot. He brought Merton Dolphin back up again, and again they knelt down and they prayed and they cried. And the following year I think they met up with the other family, and the two families met up there, and they asked Merton Dolphin would it be alright to lay a plaque. So they had that plaque made up, and it's lying up there on top of the mound, the exact spot where the ambush took place, where the two men were shot. So, in fact, I saw it when I went with Frank that day. He had difficulty finding it because it was overgrown. But Merton John knew exactly where it was. He was with us that day too. So that's just the background to it.
No, thank you.
So can I thank you, Frank, for what you've done for us all? It's great to hear this.
No, that's sure. It's nice to hear that.
Compliment you all and the wonderful work that you're doing in the Jackie Clarke Collection, and it'd be great if more people, were to go there and see what there is fascinating.
And that's what this is all about, Martin.
Yeah, it's great. No, sorry, yeah.
What's the name of that dog?
What's the name of that bog there then? It's Town of Loch then. Yeah. You know where it is? You walk the road here, you turn left, you take the first right, and that's just on the left hand side. Town of Loch, yeah. So, look, just for your information.
For having you here. Any excuse to come down to Sligo. I'm from Killarney, so I'm a Sligo person, even though Killarney is a long way over there. But I'm living in County Meath. Flat part of the country, it's a terrible place. So any excuse I get to come back down to Sligo is delightful. So I said I'd come down here tonight, and I said, what will I do? I'll just talk in general, without a script, about my interest in the War of Independence and the Civil War, that period in Sligo history, and I brought along some of the groups that have come because of that. So I'm just going to ramble on, if you like, and any question you want to ask at any stage, or especially at the end, I'd be delighted to talk about it. My interest, I'm a historian. I'll admit that now straight away. I'm a historian. But I'm not a professional historian, which means I don't teach history, I'm not in the university, I never made a living, I made very little money from any of the books I did. It's all from amateur. I'm an amateur historian in the sense of the ammo I love. Not in the sense that amateurs sometimes use as in a bit slapdash, not very particular. And as my books went on, they became more, I think, more professional. So I would think that the more recent books were, better written, better researched, and better referenced as well. And I do have a PhD in history from Trinity College, which I did in my spare time as well. So I started by writing a local history of my own parish in Killarney. The name of the parish is Killorn, but it's usually called Killarney, so it's Killorn and Killarney, which began as a project in school. When I was in training college in St. Pat's, Drumcondra, I did history, and part of that was a project, and you were recommended to do something on the local history. You went into the National Library, did some research there, and produced some projects. So this began as a project, which I continued on afterwards then. And it was always my hope that I'd write a book. The idea of writing a book appealed to me as well. So after I left St. Pat's and began teaching, I kept up some research. Now in those days, no computers, no internet, no online material. So I had to go to London one summer to research the Sligo champions for the time of the famine. To go to that place in North London where the newspaper library was and spend a whole week reading the actual Sligo newspapers. And of course reading the Sligo newspapers in the National Library. In those days you got the actual newspapers. And this was on newsprint, cheap newsprint. As you turned the pages, bits of the pages kept falling off. Because it was old. They were old and they were collapsing. And thanks be to God now you can see them online or you can see them on microfilm. But so I did that. I also I found a wonderful record in the National. They were in the forecourts at the time. They later on became the archives of famine letters that were collected by the Quakers, by the Society of Friends in Dublin, where people in the west of Ireland, all over Ireland, but especially in the west, wrote up looking for help. And there was a lady in Killorn Parish, Thompson, Kate P. Thompson, who was the lady of the house in one of the smaller little estates there, and she took a great interest in that, and she wrote a lot of begging letters, basically, up to the Quakers, looking for food and clothes as well. And they itemised what they sent down. You can find out then what they sent down each few months to Killorn. And there's a little lane there in the parish called Bohinamina, Bohinamina, the road of the meal. And that's where they set up their famine pot and they boiled whatever they got, the maize or the whatever, and gave it out. So that name still survives there. So I published this book in 1985. While I was researching it, now it ends at the end of the Civil War, which is a great pity, but researching the more recent history sometimes can be more difficult, so I'd love to see somebody from Killarney actually continue it on. But it ends at the end of the Civil War. While I was doing that, I met one man who had actually taken part in the War of Independence and the Civil War, a man called Patton from Ballymote. And he was a most interesting man. And he told me there was some people from the Killarney area took part in that. Not very many, but a few, and he could tell me about incidents that they had been involved in. So I was intrigued by this, and I thought, there are people like this, only a few people left, who actually lived through the War of Independence, lived through the Civil War, took part in ambushes and so on. Somebody needs to talk to some of those. So after I finished that, I said, okay, the next thing is going to be the War of Independence in Sligo. So, I started from a position of ignorance, absolute ignorance. I had no background. My mother's people were Fianna Fáilers and my father's people were Fine Gaelers. Neither of them very ardent or enthusiastic. So we didn't have really a historical background in that sense. None of my people took part in the Civil War and War of Independence. Okay, a grandfather spent one night in Sligo jail for, I think, having his shotgun in the thatch, and the police found it, and they brought him and his son in, but they let him out after one day. And his son, a granduncle, did attend one ambush, but the police didn't come. So that was all the action that they had taken part in. My grandfather on the other side was taken out at gunpoint by Frank Carty and his men and made take rails out of that line that went from Collooney to Claremorris, you know, the line that's still there, the proposed Greenway, in order to block that line, and that wasn't an action at all during the Civil War. And that was his action during the War of Independence. So we had no background that way, but it still intrigued me. And the question that I kept asking myself was, what actually happened during all this time? And what was it like to be actually living in Sligo during this time? So I talked to a number of people. Pat Hunt was one. There was also Sidney Gallagher, who had been mayor of Sligo. It was in Sligo, but he wouldn't talk. He certainly wouldn't talk on the record. And he was on the Free State side. And I got the impression that the winners, while they were the Free Staters, the emotional winners were the Republicans. They were the people who had history behind them almost. Sidney Gallagher, he felt, he didn't want to talk about his actions. And those two had been at the ambush at Dooney Rock. Sidney Gallagher on one side and Pat Hunt on the other side. They were shooting at each other. That was the ambush where the Ballinalee armoured car was taken by the Republicans from the Free Staters. It was renamed the Lockhill or whatever it was. But they still called it the Ballinalee, I think. So I met a number of other people. Now, looking back on that, you feel sorry that you didn't know as much as you know now, so you could have asked them more questions. Because they weren't great at kind of coming up with stuff themselves. You had to not drag it out of them, but you had to ask them questions. And you don't know the questions to ask all. So I would love to go back to that and start asking more questions. You know, questions like, why did you do it? Like, that's a question that never occurred to me at the time. Like, why did you do all that? And there's more questions like who was there, how many were there, what happened. But he was a great source of information. And so were a number of other people who were more on the periphery, people who had lived through it. So that would be one section that informed this. Newspapers then was another one. I mean, you just read through the newspapers of the time. There was the Sligo Champion, obviously. There was the Sligo Independent, which was the Protestant newspaper, really, the loyalist newspaper. That was the most interesting one, because the position of the Protestants or the loyalists during all that time was very, very interesting. Sligo being, the county in Connacht with most percentage of loyalists. I think the percentage of non-Catholics in Sligo town was 15%, and in the whole county it was a little bit less than that, but not all that much. And in Sligo town then, a large number of the businesses would have been Church of Ireland, not all, but a large number of them. So the Sligo Independent newspaper was very interesting to read. And the way these reacted to, it just got worse and worse. From their point of view, it got worse and worse and worser. Because you had the war first of all, and then you had the opposition to war. Then you had the Easter Rising. And then you had the 1918 election. And then you had Sinn Féin taking over. And then when it looked like that they actually weren't all that bad, then you had the Civil War. And that was even worse. So reading the newspaper, it's interesting to see how they dealt with that and how they tried to come to terms step by step by step. So that was very, very interesting. Then there was also the large amount of, I suppose, bureaucratic reports on both sides. I went to Kew in England, the Public Records Office there, and went through a lot of their reports. And it's amazing sometimes the amount of paperwork. For instance, in one of those by-elections in 1917, a crowd in Gurchin celebrated the Sinn Féin victory. It might have been one of the ones in the north, and they had a torchlight procession. Turf, probably soaked in oil, set fire to, and they walked past that big procession past the RSC barracks, and somebody fired a shot over the barracks. And this was reported, and it went to the local RSC wrote a report. It went to the county inspector. The county inspector sent it to Dublin Castle, and you could actually see on the file where it had gone round from office to office to office, and different civil servants writing things underneath it. And finally, after 2 or 3 months, somebody wrote something like, this was illegal, we should really prosecute these people, but you know, at this stage it's probably best to do nothing. So the amount of paperwork is enormous in some cases. So it was very interesting to go to Kew and see all that. Now a lot of that's online now. The county inspector of the RIC wrote a secret report. There's a stamp on it, you know, top secret. Now you can read it. And there's really not much in it. Every month he wrote a report. And he gave the number of Sinn Féin members in the county. And, you know, you wonder where he got the figure. None of the figures are figures like, say, 2,500. They all end with something like a 1 or a 9. So it gives the impression that he's very, very carefully counted all the people, and he comes up with a very, you know, realistic thing. But then you see next month it's exactly the same figure. So where he has got these figures, who knows? But it would be very easy to calculate them because, like, for a lot of the time, the champion would report on Sinn Féin meetings because Sinn Féin hadn't been banned at the time. So there was also the IRA, and the Dáil, when it was set up, generated a lot of paperwork itself. There's a lot of files in the National Archives, say from the court system that was set up under Dáil era. An awful lot of files, especially about the South Sligo courts, not as much about North Sligo. So there's records there of cases that came before the Sinn Féin courts of South Sligo. There's a lot of military records as well. There's papers, the Mulcahy papers, a lot of those, the McKeown papers and so on. Even more in the Civil War, but there are some as well for the War of Independence. So that was another important source. So eventually I put all that together. At the time, of course, we were complaining that the pension records are not available, and if we only had the pension records, also the witness statements, as they were called. Somebody decided to collect the statements of people who had been involved. Nothing to do with pensions or anything, but just collect the statements. So if you were involved, you were invited to write a statement of your activities. And, you know, we kept saying, if only we could see those. Now, I saw 2 or 3 of them, because in some cases, people had got copies and kept them. So families sometimes had copies of these. Now, when they did become available, not all that long ago, the witness statements in particular for Sligo were a big disappointment, because they were very much cagey, official records. And you could see the person deciding, now, what am I going to say here? So, for instance, there's not much about the Culleens ambushing. No. Because this was an official statement. Now, the pension records, which I never really researched, because all my books were published, thanks be to God, before they came out. Like, I have dipped into them, but you think, wow, there's not a lot of stuff here. So the pension records are different, because they're people claiming a pension, so they have to justify it. And I remember talking to Pat Hunt about the pension records, and I talked to him about one ambush. And I said, how many British soldiers, how many lorries came along? And he said something like 3. But for the pension records purposes, it was 4. So the way the pensions, part of the organisation of all that was that the old IRA had to come together in an area, form a committee, and make decisions themselves. So if there were questions about who was actually the OC of South Sligo, and who was adjutant, and who was quartermaster, then they had to decide, because it was going to be very difficult. And in some cases, people complained about that and wrote up and argued with it. But they came together and they decided. So they also made decisions like how many British lorries came along at a particular ambush, because depending on how many lorries, that might cloud the decision in the end, to see how serious an engagement it was. South Sligo, who took the Free State side, did talk to Area Valley and gave a great interview. Now, when you read it, you picture late at night, big fire on, bottle of whiskey, and they're having a great chat. And they really open up to Area Valley. And I mean, in fact, if you find Culleens ambushing that, it is very, very well done. And it's, you know, somebody's really talking about what actually happened. He talks about one of those 2 men breaking down and crying before he was shot. and so on. So it's really very, very good. So the Ernie O'Malley papers are great. The only problem is that Ernie O'Malley was a dreadful writer. And he used abbreviations sometimes, which it can be difficult to figure out what he's abbreviating, what does it mean. And his writing is very difficult to decipher. And you can't make photocopies. No, not in that time anyway. They're up, and they're in UCD archive. So anyway, I put the book together. I called it Sligo 1914-1921, A Chronicle of Conflict, and I published it myself as I did that. There are no footnotes to it, so it's not in any sense academic. There's a good bibliography and list of sources, so that's good. But the lack of footnotes means that if you want to figure out how did I find out a particular thing there, you have to go back and sort of guess. So academics would call it a popular history, and popular would be a kind of a derogatory term there. So it started in 1914, which I'll come back to again. One of the things I think I learned was that you can't write about the War of Independence without going back. Because, you know, the War of Independence, when did it start? Okay, so it started at Solihull Beg, the same day as the Dáil Net, so that's early 1919, but you can't start there because you have to go back about the Dáil, and you have to go back a little bit more, the rise of Sinn Féin, you have to go back to 1916, and then you have to bring in the war. So at least you have to go back to the beginning of 1940. And as I discovered later, in fact, you have to go back to at least 1912. So I learned a lot while doing this. And I had intended that this would cover the Civil War as well, but there was no way you could include the Civil War. There's over 300 pages in this. So I published that myself, and I was thrilled with that. And then having done that, I already had a lot of research done for the Civil War. I then went to some of the universities and said, look, I'm a great historian, look what I've done. Can I be taken on as a student to do a master's on some element of this? Can I turn this into a master's? Can I go on? UCD wrote back to me, I won't mention her name, saying, you know, I've read your book, it doesn't really show signs of you know, what's necessary to do a PhD, to do a master's. A bit sniffy, but I actually met her recently, she was very nice. I don't think she realised that she was quite clever. But then Trinity College, I got a letter from Trinity College saying, come on up for an interview. So I went up for an interview with David Fitzpatrick, who's a very well-known historian. And I chatted to him. And I got a letter then a few days later saying, yeah, come on, you can do a master's. So you pay them a sizable amount of money for the use of their library and a meeting with David Fitzpatrick 3 or 4 times a year. And he made us some kind of a sneer the first time I met him, saying, we have a number of teachers doing what you're doing, and you know, some of them have been at it for 10 years. Of course, for Trinity College, that means they get so many thousand each year out of it. So it took me 5 years to do it. And David Fitzpatrick, he wrote a famous book on Clare, on the War of Independence, published by Cork University Press, that really broke the mould. And you know this thing about there's revisionism in Irish history. A few years ago, there was a big talk about revisionism. The idea was that there were a number of historians who deliberately were twisting history and not writing history like it used to be written. I mean, I was asked to put a title on this, and I said, what did I say, 25 Glorious Years.
Yes.
Now that's imitating the name of a book, 4 Glorious Years by Frank Gallagher. And the 4 Glorious Years were probably ending in 21, so 21, 20, 19 and 18. And I mean, the title there gives you that air of 4 Glorious Years. So these were the great years. And it, you know, congratulating and feeling very good about the IRA and not taking anything else into account at all. So the revisionists kind of came along and, you know, questioned, especially about 1916, you know, was 1916 a good thing or not? What would have happened if 1916 didn't happen? And so on. So David Fitzpatrick would have been put in that boat. But I found him an excellent supervisor who never told me what I should write, but did give me a lot of advice on how to do it, and gave me a lot of sources and so on. So I struggled there for 5 years working on the Civil War. Now, because it's academic, it meant if I said, I'm just going to write what happened during the Civil War, he'd say, no way, you can't do that. That's not academic. You have to interpret as well. So this book, which came out of it, The Aftermath of Revolution, he suggested the title actually. It does have a narrative. In other words, what happened? A brief summary of the War of Independence. Then it goes on to the Civil War, and then it does a number of themes. And one of the themes it talks about is Protestants during that period. Because there had been a book, you may know Peter Hart, the historian is dead, but he caused a lot of controversy by writing about Cork, controversy on a number of different areas, but especially about the treatment of Protestants in Cork. And in an interview or something, he did actually even use the term ethnic cleansing. Not in his book, but it was mentioned as a kind of a throwaway mentioned by him, and he caused a lot of animosity because of that. So anybody who writing about the Civil War or the War of Independence now has to ask the question, well, how did the Protestants get on? How were they treated? So I did a chapter on those. And my conclusion would not have been the same as his. My conclusion would be that they were generally not picked upon. Because they were generally regarded as being loyalists, then sometimes, if the IRA, during the time of their training camps during the truce, wanted to requisition some supplies from a shop, they might be more likely to pick a shop that was owned by Church of Ireland rather than Catholics, because it would be assumed that the Church of Ireland might be more loyalist than the Catholics. But there was no case of house burning, of a Church of Ireland house, a big house typically, being burned in Sligo during the War of Independence or the Civil War. Now that's in a contrast to Cork and many other areas. And I mean, there were all those at Lissadell, Annamore, there's a whole lot of them. None of those were burnt. After the Civil War, loyalists were asked to claim from the British government for loss during the War of Independence and the Civil War. And all those files are in the National Archives in London, and I've gone through all of them. So I've recorded all the different Church of Ireland people who claimed for damages during that time. Now, there was no claim for death. There were claims for things being stolen out of the house. There were claims for harassment. And most of the claims came from, in fact, I don't think there was any claim from Terrera at all, from this area, from Ballina right over towards Ballysadare. I don't think there was any claim from anyone in this area at all. There were claims, quite a number of claims from Riverstown area, where there was quite a large pocket of Church of Ireland people. There actually had been an Orange Lodge in Riverstown up to, I'm not quite sure, but certainly up to 1910, 1950. There were a number of claims from Sligo town, and there were a number of claims scattered through, say, the Liney area, which are recording in that area, but not many. And there was nothing that was really serious. So my conclusion about the Protestants was that they weren't really picked upon to that extent. I did a chapter on daily life during the Civil War. Like, what was it actually like? I tried to find prices. I found an old ledger from a shop in Collection that had lists of, people on ticks. People, what tick is. So you could find out how much butter cost, how much milk cost, all during the Civil War, and see, did it go up very much, and it didn't. I found a number of schools, and I got their attendance record, including Colleens School. Yes, I think I used 4 schools, but one of them was Colleens, to see what was the attendance like all during the Civil War. Like, did it dip a lot, and it didn't. And I found a school beside where there was an ambush in South Sligo, Halsburg, where two spies were killed by Frank Carty. And I found the National School, which was very close there. And you'd be wondering, like, what happened that week? And what happened was the school opened on Monday. There weren't all that many pupils in, and it closed on Tuesday. The killings happened on that Saturday night. And then it opened the rest of the week, and attendance was normal. So I tried to find, I counted, for instance, the number of dances and so on that were going on during that time and that had been going on before the Civil War, and comparing them. And there certainly was a lull in the number of entertainments that were going on around the country. So that kind of stuff, you know, it's fascinating. Law and order as well, daily life. Yeah, I did a good lot on looking at who were actually involved in the Civil War on both sides. Because there was a theory, and you still hear it, that the Civil War division was a class division. Some left-wing historians would like to think that the Civil War had a class basis to it. So here you had the bourgeoisie taking over, and the Cushwincher, the working class being dumbed down again. Now, it's probably an element of truth in that, but if you look at the people who were involved in the IRA and the Republican side, they were not, lower working class. They were more likely to be sort of general middle class. And there's a record of who was actually in the Free State Army. And I got all those together, and I tried to find them all in the census. Now, that was before the age of the census online. So when I had to find somebody, I got his address. I tried to figure out what district electoral division he was in. I went up to the National Archives, and I asked for the bundle of census papers. So you got out this brown parcel that was very dusty because no one had looked at it. Opened it up, and you have to go through them one by one to see could you find this person. And if he wasn't in it, then he might be in the next door one. So you got that one. Now you go on the internet, you go to the census, you just put in a surname or an approximation of a surname if you're not quite sure, and you'll find it. So I went through all those, and I worked out. One thing I looked at was the quality of the house, which you can find out in the census. The other thing I went to then was, having found them there, I went to the valuation office to see the size of their farm. So I tried to figure out, what class did these soldiers come from? And in general, they came from the poorer class. In general, the soldiers of the Free State Army were the poorer class. In a way, I suppose they were the same people who joined the British Army before that. And partly that's just because it's a job and because it's paid. They're not, you could argue that they're not joining the Free State Army because they believe in the Free State. But on the other hand, if they were Republicans, then they wouldn't join the Free State Army. So my finding there again says, no, there is no class basis in the Civil War division. Now, any finding like that, of course, is open to question. And somebody else will come back again in years to come and challenge Farry. Farry in 1999 says this, but blah, blah, and that's fine. That's great. There's no problem with that. You do the best you can for the time, and that's all you can do.